Every single ICE agent who's engaged in this aggressive overreach, no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, will of course be identified. This is not the 1930s.
Secret police who are masked, who are intimidating, who are scaring people. These Gestapo-like tactics.
This is Gestapo-like behavior.
Donald Trump's modern-day Gestapo is scooping folks up off the streets.
When you compare the old films of the Gestapo grabbing people off the streets of Poland, it does look like a Gestapo operation.
You posted on social media that, quote, ICE is acting like a terrorist force.
ICE agents, they are coming and kidnapping and disappearing people on the streets of the United States.
But this terror campaign of having masked people rolling up in vans, but we also have to talk about the agents themselves that are carrying this out. If you have any decency, quit now. Because just doing what you were told has been the justification for some of the worst horrors and crimes against humanity.
Masked agents of the state in unmarked vehicles are terrorizing communities. They are disappearing people.
Meanwhile,
those ICE agents not shot or hurt. We do not know, however, the motive of the shooter. That still remains an open question and will be under investigation, and we'll be continuing to ask our sources more about that. But what the Department of Homeland Security has pointed out is that this same facility back in late August also had to contend with a bomb threat at that facility. So certainly ICE has been contending with additional assaults, attacks, and threats to their facilities. But
I can confirm at this time that the FBI is investigating this incident as an act of targeted violence. It is unfortunately just the most recent example we've seen of targeted violence, to include here in North Texas, where back on July 4th, we saw a coordinated attack carried out against an immigration detention center in Alvarado, Texas.
There was also a bomb threat at this facility in August.
Early evidence that we've seen from rounds that were found near the suspected shooter contain messages that are anti-ICE in nature.
Jesus.
Again, this is just the most recent example
Ban
of this
Dremels.
type of attack.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about what appears to be, yet again, another act of far-left domestic terrorism, something that we're seeing far too often in this country, a problem that we have to address at this point. It is getting out of control how radicalized these individuals are. And the party that is responsible for radicalizing these individuals is the Democrat Party. Something that the mainstream liberal media refuses to acknowledge. And once again, we have liberals going into full-blown cope over the fact that one of their own radicalized disciples decided to commit an act of domestic terrorism, this time against ICE. In Dallas, Texas, an ICE facility, an ICE office was targeted by a would-be sniper who decided to start open firing on some of the individuals at the facility, and he ended up killing 2 detainees and injuring another before killing himself. Now, again, this is just another pattern of the far-left domestic terrorism that we're seeing in this country that the mainstream liberal media refuses to acknowledge, okay? And this is what we have to cover because they're in full-blown cope mode over the fact that, once again, we're seeing the biggest domestic terror threat to this country in action. Again, this is something I've been warning about for years, okay? Do not let yourself get gaslighted by these individuals who keep claiming that, no, this is not a problem, right? Because stuff like this, they never count this as far left, even though it clearly is far left. And again, this is just one of many far left acts of domestic terrorism that we've seen over the past 2 weeks. I've counted 4 now, right? 4 at this point. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
Nicole Parker, former FBI special agent and Fox News contributor. I mean, as you hear Chad Wolf lay that out, I mean, that is specific. What else should we know at this point? What are we looking at?
I do think that that's absolutely critical to the investigation is the anti-ICE sentiments written on the shell casings, and we are seeing a pattern of that. We saw, writings on shell casings with Mangione, with the Charlie Kirk tragedy, things of this nature. It's becoming common. People are getting inspired by others, and I appreciate Senator Ted Cruz, very, very strong, saying this will not be tolerated. This has got to stop. Some things that I picked up on, Harris, as a former FBI agent, The FBI will take lead of this investigation because it was an attack on a federal facility and an attack potentially on federal officers, these ICE officers. Having done prisoner transport, obviously a little bit different. I know that when I've done prisoner transport to the federal detention center, and in Miami, for example, we pull in our vehicle with the subject in the back of the car. We pull into the Sally Port, and there's literally a gate that comes down before we get out of our vehicle. So it looks like maybe the ICE facility in Dallas has a different sort of protocol there, that this individual is able to haphazardly fire to a van. So again, their target, they don't even seem to have had eyes on the target. They were just firing at whoever was in the van. And earlier you had on Trey Gowdy, who asked a very good question about motive. But I think as a result of the press conference, it is probably a target on the ICE officers and not on the individuals that were being processed.
Here's something new that is just coming in. My team is telling me this now. To make your point, Nicole, it was an unmarked, hard-sided van. So the fact that there were detainees in it, probably not known, or heavily perhaps not known by the person who was firing, because it was difficult to see who would have been in that van. Finish your point. I just wanted to get that in there.
You are exactly right, Harris. That is a very, very important point to the investigation. Again, a lot of times these are, like you said, an unmarked van. This is something that when they're doing these ERO operations, I know that the FBI has helped with many of them. It's kind of an all hands on deck with Trump's platform and getting rid of those that are not here legally. Most of the time the hits are earlier in the morning. And so this person, again, without knowing, may know the pattern and may have been keeping an eye on this ICE facility and knowing, okay, they typically do these processings early in the morning. So, you know, they'll do a full investigation to this individual when they were typically seen around the facility, if they were seen around doing surveillance leading up to this tragedy. But it will be an FBI investigation. I do know that the FBI's evidence response team from the Dallas field office is on the ground at the facility processing the crime scene. This will be an all hands on deck. Obviously, the subject is deceased with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, so this will not be going to trial potentially, but don't kid yourself. The FBI is going to do a full investigation to see if this individual is linked to anybody else. And we've been talking about this constant attacks on ICE. This is unacceptable. It cannot continue to happen in our country. These are officers that are putting their lives on the line every single day. They did not make up these laws. They are enforcing laws that have been on the books forever. And
yeah, so you're saying that, you heard that. Okay, now I just want to play some clips of CNN and MSNBC, who, of course, you know, at the beginning of this, claimed that, well, you know, we won't really know the motive. I just wanted to play some clips of how they responded to learning that anti-ICE messaging was written on the bullet casings. Just pay attention to how they react to this. Take a look.
Based on messages being written on the shell casings found near the shooter, who we are told took his own life after the shooting, gives us some now direction as to motive. Anti-ICE messages. We also heard from the ICE official who, you know, making a turn, said, referring to the July 4th shooting you and I were talking about a short time ago at another ICE location from an individual who fired from on the ground, that the rhetoric has to stop, he said. It just has to stop. There is no secret, given the events of the last couple of weeks, that we are in a very brittle time in terms of politics, in terms of rhetoric. And
got there. What was your top takeaway listening?
Well, one other clarification, Anna, which is that they're now saying that one person, in addition to the shooter, was killed, not two. So one person killed, two injured, in addition to the shooter, if I heard that correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. But
that's what I got, too. Two people deceased, including the shooter.
Okay. And look, I think the bullet casings engraved with anti-ICE messages is a huge and key revelation in this case, because this is now the third instance of targeted violence where we're seeing that. Obviously, the Charlie Kirk assassination and the Luigi Mangione alleged killing of the United Healthcare CEO in New York being the others, and that suggests that there's a copycat phenomenon going on here, and the fact that they're investigating this as a potential act of targeted violence, I think we can conclude that ICE was targeted here based on that piece of evidence, that is extremely significant, and just cast this in a new light and suggest that this is the latest in a series of incidents that really underscore the problem that we are experiencing right now in this country with politically motivated violence. And you heard the Senator Ted Cruz there talking about dialing down the rhetoric. That is a perfectly reasonable thing to say, but this issue of immigration and what ICE is doing in communities is incredibly, incredibly divisive, and it's hard to imagine really that people are going to stop feeling as strongly as they do about it. But we all need to be mindful of the fact that people are being attacked and killed as a result, perhaps, of some of this rhetoric.
Inspired? Are you worried about copycats?
Yes. I don't know if the rooftop trend is going to be a thing. I mean, it could just be coincidental that the best vantage point just happened to be elevated positions in this case. But, people emulating this kind of attack is certainly a concern. The irony with the writing, the first time we really saw that was Brenton Tarrant in the Christchurch shooting in a mosque in New Zealand. And he was a fierce, white supremacist and neo-Nazi, and wrote all over his weapon and his rounds very hateful information. So to see this coming from, potentially the other side of the political spectrum is a little strange, because it is not something, if you are trying to, carry out some kind of message countering, more extreme right-wing stuff. I don't know why you would, use a tactic that a famous white supremacist who has been revered and copycatted over the years by other white supremacists, why you would do that. But it does appear that people are moving in that direction because they want people to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Again, terrorism is theater. They want people to understand their message and why they're doing this and why, in some cases, it's a narrow act of violence.
Looking at ICE in this moment.
It is very difficult, not just in ICE, but of all immigrants, and immigrant lawyers, anyone who's in the immigration field, because this isn't an isolated incident. We have seen death among non-citizens being increased, and the victims here, that the two killed were non-citizens being detained at that time. And so it is very difficult. It has been a very decisive environment, and the rhetoric does have to stop. Just yesterday, Homeland Security released a propaganda video on their social website stating or using Nintendo's Pokemon to catch them all and continuing to dehumanize non-citizens.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that if you were targeting ICE, you wouldn't write anti-ICE in pen or marker on the bullets that you use to shoot ICE detainees at an ICE facility in Texas. I think that the idea that they think that people are going to buy this, that people are going to buy that it said anti-ICE on these bullets and that this guy was actually anti-ICE, this is truly insane that Kash Patel is trying to pass this off as an attack on law enforcement when 2 detainees, 2 immigrants have been killed, 3 have been shot, and the shooting suspect is a 29-year-old named Joshua Jahn who is white and looks like someone who would be shooting the detainees, not someone who would be targeting ICE. And I think it's despicable that the government is trying to pass this off as anything else.
Cop to another cop. Really quick, write something anti-ICE on the bullet casings. Okay, anti-ICE. They think we're so dumb. Some super cop in Dallas is going to get out to his press conference and he's going to do his trans Antifa tap dance because nobody cares about the truth anymore. When detainees at an ICE facility were shot. Detainees were shot by an anti-ICE person. My hunch is that they're MAGA. They watch Fox News all day. They think that these are cat-eating, asylum criminals, and they wanted to go shoot some fish in a barrel before they off themselves. That's what happened. But the cops have to go out there and do their trans Antifa tap dance, blame everything on the trans Antifa anti-ICE, and some idiot cop couldn't think of an anti-ICE slogan or a thought or belief or a saying. So he just wrote anti-ICE real quick with a Sharpie on this bullet. So dumb. We are not this dumb. I promise you're not this dumb. I promise you're not this dumb.
Yeah, the cope is real, guys. The cope is real. This is what happens when you know deep down inside that our side is out of control, right? We're getting out of control. It is getting to the point now where it's hard to continue to play this mental gymnastics game with the American people and pretend as if these people aren't far left radical lunatics, right? Again, this is why they're in full-blown cope mode, okay? Responding to the MSNBC propagandist, this guy basically tried to claim that, well, I don't know why somebody who would be a leftist would use white supremacist tactics of writing messages on bullet casings, right? Referencing the New Zealand shooting, which again happened in another country, okay? But he's completely ignoring the context of the fact that you had Luigi Mangione, who is a far leftist, okay? He wrote messages on bullet casings, and also Charlie Kirk's assassin did the same thing. This guy most likely was inspired by other leftists who have decided to do this rather than some right wing or some white supremacists. But again, they can't help themselves. They can't help themselves. So I'm not surprised because these people, when it's one of their own, again, they default to the messaging of being anti-gun, one, and then two, well, it's a white male. So let's blame the white male. Let's totally forget about the fact that this guy is a leftist because, again, they want to make it a white male problem instead of a political problem. Like, for example, Brian Krassenstein says, this is sick. This us sick is what he wrote. Clearly, he's not, paying attention to what he's writing here. A white male, again, has reportedly opened fire at immigrants at an ICE facility in Dallas, Texas. We certainly have a problem in this country, a disgusting problem. Yeah, so again, instead of blaming his own side, right? This guy is so brainwashed against his own race that he decides that, you know what, we're going to make this about the dude being white. We're going to make it about him being white. As if him being white has anything to do with it. I think what has to do with it more so anything, again, is this dude's ideology. Clearly, this was political. But see, they can't acknowledge that. They can't acknowledge that he was a leftist. They're never going to acknowledge that. It doesn't matter if the dude says, I am a leftist. It doesn't matter how much the shooter, what messages the shooter says that clearly show that this is a left-wing act of violence. They're never going to acknowledge it. They're going to deflect to any and everything they can. Again, anti-gun rhetoric, white male, they're going to deflect to anything to not acknowledge that the mass shooter or the shooter, the domestic terrorist, was a leftist, was one of their own, right? Morgan J. Freeman says, and again, he has a No Kings profile picture here, which again is anti-ICE, okay? Another white male has opened fire at immigrants at an ICE facility in Dallas, Texas. We have a problem in this country, and it's white. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, guys. Absolutely fascinating. So we have identified the shooter. Now, I'm not going to post pictures of the shooter because I don't know if the pictures that I've seen thus far are actually the shooter, right? It's very early, so I don't want to put out any type of misinformation or wrongly identify anybody. I'm just going with what's been verified here, which is that the anti-ICE gunman who opened fire on the ICE facility has been identified as Joshua Jahn, okay? And apparently John is 29. Again, he died from self-inflicted gunshot wounds at the scene. Now, I saw a gruesome photo of what appears to be the guy on X, but again, I don't know if that is all verified. So at this point, I'm just going to play it safe and just give you guys the name. And then, once pictures come out, we can see what the dude looked like, who he was. But again, it's clear here what happened, right? This guy was targeting an ICE facility, okay? And he decided to open fire, hoping that he would kill ICE agents, but he ended up killing migrants, presumably people who are here illegally instead. Now, I don't know why this is so hard for leftists to grasp, right? They're trying to come up with all these conspiracy theories talking about some, migrants were killed, right? So therefore, it couldn't have been a far leftist. It's like, no. If you actually read the story, if you understand exactly why and how this happened, he was targeting an unmarked vehicle. He didn't know who was in the vehicle. He was just open firing, trying to kill somebody, right? Again, presumably targeting actual law enforcement. And unfortunately for the illegal immigrants, they ended up getting shot instead, even though they weren't the targets, right? Clearly they weren't the targets. So that's what happened here. Now, again, it's very clear who this person was inspired by. He was inspired by the anti-ICE rhetoric that we see on channels like CNN, MSNBC, coming from the Democrat Party and the far left. These are the people who run around calling ICE the Gestapo, claiming they're disappearing people off the streets and stuff like this, radicalizes people.
That's happening in the United States of America. Masked men jumping out of unmarked cars, people disappearing, no due process, no oversight, zero accountability, happening in the United States of America today. People ask, well, is authoritarianism, you're being hyperbolic? Bull, we're being hyperbolic. If you're a black and brown community, it's here in this country. And so I'm deeply proud that I had the privilege of signing the nation's first bill to address the issue of masking, also to require you have simple identification, to your point. I mean, if some guy jumped out of an unmarked car in a van with a mask on, tried to grab me, I mean, by definition, you're going to push back. And so these are not just authoritarian tendencies. These are authoritarian actions by an authoritarian government. You saw what Stephen Miller said last week. This should put chills up spine. Called the Democratic Party an extremist organization. Basically a terrorist organization, saying he's going after his enemies. You saw the tweet that Donald Trump sent out, Truth Social, basically telling Pam Bondi, I want these 3 people taken out. That's happening in the United States.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that. Again, what Democrats refuse to acknowledge, and it is very simple, right? I've got this figured out. I've got it figured out. Is that their side of the aisle, their supporters, self-reportedly have higher rates of mental illness, okay? They self-reportedly have mental health problems. They also believe in violence, particularly groups like Antifa, anti-fascists, who, you know, hey, leftists say everybody should be anti-fascist, right? Anti-fascists explicitly believe in violence, okay? Liberals, again, believe that violence is okay to achieve their political goals. This is what they believe. This has been measured. This is undisputable. So when you combine those things, that's why this is not a both sides problem. This is why the Democrats have a rhetoric problem, because their supporters can't handle the rhetoric, right? If a Republican calls a Democrat or leftist a communist, conservatives don't act on that. Why? Because as Christian conservatives, right, that's not how we deal with problems. We pray for them. We pray for the communists, okay? And then we mobilize through voting, okay, through nonviolent actions, through debate, which is what Charlie Kirk was doing, in order to push back against it. We don't resort to violence because that's not in our nature, okay? That's not in our nature. But the nature of these leftists, of these liberals, again, this is measured stuff, is that, again, not only do they believe violence is necessary, but they also have higher rates of mental health problems. Those two things in combination is why it's not the same thing when a Republican calls a Democrat a communist, which again, they will argue, oh, see, that's, they call me a communist. That rhetoric is inflammatory, right? It's not the same thing because conservatives can actually handle that. Conservatives don't act on it in violent ways. But when a Democrat calls a Republican a fascist, right? When they start calling ICE Gestapo, comparing them to Nazis, it's a lot worse because their supporters act on it, right? They commit acts of violence because of it. And not only do they commit acts of violence, they celebrate it, right? They celebrate what happened. Again, as they did with Charlie Kirk, as they did with Luigi Mangione, right? They celebrate it. And celebrating it inspires copycats. It inspires people to go out and to do stuff like this, to commit acts of violence. This is why all these leftists, they got fired from their jobs for celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This is why they deserve. This is why I told you guys that's basically like incitement. That's what it is, because it motivates people to commit these acts of violence, especially these people who self-reportedly have mental illness, right? Again, this is common sense. It's common sense. And that's why it's not a both sides issue. It's not. It's not. And at some point, these people, again, they are going to get tired of covering up and pretending as if this is not a thing. And I've been saying this for years and years and years because I have been doing this job for years and years and years. And I know with my own two eyes what I have observed, which is that far left radical extremism is the biggest domestic terror threat to this country. We lived through the BLM riots, Roe v. Wade riots, pro-Palestine riots, anti-ICE riots. We've lived, these are all far left movements, groups. But yeah, these are people who will come out here and they'll say, well, see, the ADL says that most of the political violence comes from the right, right? This is what they'll say. Meanwhile, they don't count stuff like this. They're not going to count these guys as far leftists. They're not going to count the guy that assassinated Charlie Kirk as a far leftist. They're not going to count Luigi Mangione as a far leftist. But they'll count some random fight between a white supremacist and somebody in a prison, right, as well. See, that's far right political violence, right? That's what they do. That's how they rig the numbers. That's how they rig the data, right? They don't count the BLM riots. They don't count any of that stuff. But they'll find any way to say that something is far right. When you realize that the game is rigged, that the numbers are rigged, you understand that I don't believe anything except my own eyes. And what my own eyes and what my own ears, what my own senses are telling me is that the problem is left-wing extremism. And the liberal media and the Democrat Party, they are complicit because they're using this inflammatory rhetoric that is radicalizing their supporters, again, who have higher rates of mental issues, and they explicitly believe in violence. That's the problem. And until that problem is acknowledged, until something is done about that, unfortunately, it seems as if this is just going to become a pattern in this country. And we're going to see it over and over, and people are going to lose their lives. And these people are going to sit on mainstream liberal media and pretend like it's not a problem. And they got blood on their hands, man. If you're one of these leftists in the media, if you're one of these Democrats and you continue to deflect away from this problem and pretend like it's not a problem while also engaging in this hyperbolic rhetoric that is radicalizing your base because you want power and control, you have blood on your hands at this point. You are complicit in what is happening. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.